All right, so you guys have sent over some really fascinating stuff on apologetics,
Mm-hmm.
specifically about how to approach it, from a Christian perspective.
Right.
And we're going to kind of unpack some of the ideas in this source,
Okay.
Apologetics in the Manner of Jesus, and really see how it can help, equip us to better engage in conversations
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
about faith, really with the same kind of heart posture as Jesus.
And I think that's what's so key, because a lot of times, we hear that word apologetics
Yeah.
and we immediately think like, fire and brimstone and debating,
Totally.
like
Arguing, trying to win,
winning arguments.
yeah,
And,
one-upmanship and...
right. And this really kind of flips that on its head
Okay.
and says, really at its core, apologetics should be about serving others. And it should be, we should be approaching these conversations with compassion.
And that's huge. And it's interesting, too, because, one of the things the text uses is this phrase,
Yeah.
shrewd as serpents, innocent as doves.
Yes.
And it's like, it's not about manipulation,
Right.
but it is about this genuine care for the person you're actually talking to. Recognizing that, they're not always coming at it from this place of just like, I'm rejecting this out of spite.
Right.
But oftentimes it's genuine misunderstanding.
Absolutely. I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up is, they assume that everyone is coming to the table having read the same books or with the same background.
Oh, really?
And they're not.
Yeah.
And so to address those misunderstandings, I
Mm-hmm.
think this source brings out a really fascinating concept. And that's tapaina funin.
Okay. No, hold on a second. Say that one more time.
Tapaina funin.
Okay. I'm going to butcher this every time. But
That's all right. It's a mouthful.
it's a mouthful, but break it down.
So basically it goes a step beyond simple humility.
Okay.
It's really about this idea of having humility of mind. So setting aside your ego when you're coming to these conversations,
Wow.
approaching it, almost like as a fellow traveler, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're all on this journey together, seeking truth.
So instead of this like me versus them, it's like we.
Exactly.
It isn't.
And I think, to that point, the source gives a really powerful example of this. It talks about how Jesus, even when he was confronted by those who doubted him, he didn't often respond with pronouncements. He often responded with questions.
Wow.
He met them where they were.
That's really good.
And he invited them to think more deeply.
So it wasn't this instant, like, trying to win them over, which I think
Right.
we can all fall prey to, I think.
Actually.
But it was, how do we understand where you're even coming from?
Yeah.
Even if, maybe you and I don't see eye to eye right now.
Yeah. It's about really understanding that perspective, even if you disagree with it.
That's huge. That's a game changer.
And, I think that leads us to another really crucial point that the source makes, which is that while compassion is vital, this approach never shies away from truth.
Right.
It actually refers to Jesus as the faithful and true witness.
Wow.
And it recognizes that truth has consequences.
And that makes me think about that line from the source where it says, let me see if I can find it exactly. Truth reveals reality. And reality can be described as what we humans run into when we are wrong, in the collision we always lose.
It's such a powerful statement
It's so good.
about the importance of truth.
Because it is about this weight that it has, right? Like, we can't just ignore it or distort it.
Right, because that leads to harm.
Right.
And I don't think this source is by any means saying, water down your beliefs.
Right.
But it is saying handle them with care.
Yeah.
Handle them with respect and recognize the impact that they have.
So we're not just like throwing these arguments out there.
Right.
But we're realizing that these conversations have weight
Yes.
for both ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and the people we're engaging with.
Absolutely. And I think, it's about approaching them in a way that acknowledges the gravity of truth, but simultaneously extends grace
Yeah.
and understanding.
It is. It's that balance, right?
It is. It's a very delicate balance.
So how do we do that?
It's funny you ask that because I think the next part of this really digs into that.
I mean,
It almost like challenges us to say, okay, how differently would these conversations go if instead of, focusing on winning the argument, we were focused on serving the person that we disagree with?
so it's less about this like intellectual dominance and more about, I don't know, spiritual generosity. Is that too much?
Not at all.
I-
I think that's a really good way to put it.
Okay.
And kind of coming back to that word we were talking about earlier, tapaina funin,
Right.
that humility of mind.
Right. It's all coming together now.
This source argues that Embodying that is a form of service.
Mm.
It's about considering the other person's heart, their experiences, the things that might lead them to this current understanding.
So it's not pretending that their objections aren't valid,
Right.
but it's like really taking the time to see it through their lens.
Yes. And doing so in a way that honors their dignity.
Right.
Even when we're discussing, challenging topics or sensitive topics, it's recognizing that behind every argument, there's a human heart searching for truth,
That's good.
even if they haven't found the same truth we have.
Yeah, and I think about conversations I've been in where I'm so busy, making sure that I'm right and I'm defending what I believe, that I've forgotten that there's actually another person here.
Right. And I think that's something we all grapple with, right?
Yeah.
But I think this source reminds us that true apologetics in the manner of Jesus is rooted in love. It's about building bridges of understanding, not walls of division.
And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to say, hey, I hear that, but have you ever considered this?
Absolutely. And this source even encourages us to engage with clarity and reasonableness.
Okay.
But here's the thing. It's not an either or.
What do you mean?
We're not choosing between love and reason.
Okay.
This approach argues that they actually work hand in hand. Because sometimes love looks like patiently explaining something in a way that someone can understand.
Right.
Sometimes it looks like asking thought-provoking questions that help them examine their own beliefs.
It's about meeting them where they're at intellectually and emotionally and walking alongside them.
Exactly. And recognizing that we don't have to have all the answers ourselves.
Right.
In fact, the source makes a really important point about the role of the Holy Spirit in all of this.
Okay.
It reminds us that
It
ultimately...
ultimately comes down to like surrendering the outcome to God.
Exactly. We can prepare our hearts. We can sharpen our minds,
Right.
But the source reminds us that it's the Holy Spirit that really opens hearts to the gospel.
Yeah. And I think, speaking from experience, I've definitely been in those conversations where it's like, man, no matter how well I feel like I'm articulating this,
Right.
it's just not clicking.
Yeah.
And I think that's where what we're talking about today is so freeing because it's like, our job isn't to convert anyone.
Right. Our job is to be faithful witnesses, to present the truth with love, and to trust that the Holy Spirit will do the rest.
It's like that old saying, preach the gospel, use words if necessary, because sometimes the most powerful apologetic is just a life that's lived well.
Absolutely. And the source actually says, towards the end, there's a line that really struck me. It says, our confidence is totally in him.
Wow.
And I think, to me, that is the heart of this entire approach to apologetics.
It takes the pressure off.
It does.
Because it's like, I don't have to go into this like, afraid or like I need to prove something.
Right.
It's more just like, hey, we can go into this humbly with open hands.
With a posture of humility and trust.
Yes.
And recognizing that we're not alone in this. We have the Holy Spirit guiding us.
And it's his truth, ultimately.
Exactly.
Not ours.
Yes.
I mean, this has been so good.
It's been a good conversation.
As we kind of start to wrap up here, is there like one thing you would say to our listeners that you really hope they take away from this conversation?
I think if there's one thing to take away, it's that, engaging in apologetics in the manner of Jesus, it's less about mastering arguments. And it's more about cultivating a heart posture that reflects Christ's own compassion, humility, and reliance on the Holy Spirit.
So good to approach these conversations, not as battles to be won, but opportunities to love, to serve, and to point people towards truth.
Yes.
In a way that's graceful and authentic.
Beautifully said.
Thank you. And who knows? Maybe that's what opens a heart to really hear the message.
Absolutely.
This has been fantastic. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.